Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the MnSTAC Monthly Forum. My name is Ryan Murphy from the University of Minnesota. Before we get started today with Shane, we're gonna just make a few announcements. Please remember to keep yourself muted while Shane's speaking. We have good attendance today, so that'd be helpful. I will be monitoring the chat if there are other questions, and I'm sure Shane will be able to see that as well. Please save the date for the Minnesota Shade Tree Short Course, March 15th and 16th. The decision has been made that the 2022 Shade Tree Short Course will be held virtually. Please watch for more information and registration coming soon. A reminder that today's presentation is being recorded, and we post these to our UMN Urban Forestry YouTube channel. If you haven't already, please do sign up for the MnSTAC newsletter to receive news and announcements regarding urban and community forestry around Minnesota. I'm going to go ahead and paste in a few of those links to the chat. Next, I'd like to pass along a few announcements from Karen Zumach, president of MnSTAC. First, Happy New Year, 2022, here we are. MnSTAC is currently looking to fill some board vacancies. Time commitments include quarterly meetings. Generally, these are on Thursdays, and participation in subcommittee activities to support MnSTAC's ongoing effort to support urban and community forestry across the state. Details on how to apply can be found on the MnSTAC website, www.mnstac.org. Some of the board vacancies include an MSA liaison, student representative. Normally this has been a student from U of M, but doesn't have to be, municipal forester, and tree board representative. Lastly, MnSTAC would love to hear from you. Is there something exciting going on in your urban and community forestry program? Are you doing something innovative to improve your community? Are there people in your community you want us to know about? Please let us know so we can share with our MnSTAC community. And if you would like to reach out, you can do so at info@mnstac.org. I'll paste that in there as well. And just a second reminder for those just joining, please keep yourself on mute during the presentation, and we will be monitoring the chat for questions. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Shane Brockshus from Bailey Nurseries. Shane is a graduate of Iowa State University, where he received a Bachelor of Science in Horticulture. And it was actually in college, he got his first start with Bailey Nurseries as an intern and has been with the nursery ever since. Shane spent many years out on the West Coast and has recently returned to Minnesota, as he says, to test his resolve in winter. Shane is currently the Chief Operations Officer for Bailey. With that, Shane, thank you so much for speaking to our group today. And I'll yield the virtual floor to you.
All right, thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me. You got my last name right. You said who I am and my history, so I won't go any farther into that. I'm with Bailey Nurseries. If you're not very familiar with Bailey's, we are based here in Newport, Minnesota, wholesale nursery, going on over 115 years now, still family owned, still family managed and operated by the 4th generation. Now we've got some 5th generation in ownership and working at the nursery as well. We grow bare root, containers, greenhouse products. More recently, branding is also a bigger part of what we do. About 45% of our total sales is in trees. That's anything from a seedling to up to a 25 gallon. That's the largest size we sell. And we were chatting as we were waiting to get on. I was just in Oregon last week, where our harvest from the Barrett fields goes throughout the winter. We are wrapping that up, but all told, we'll dig a little over 1 million shade trees this winter. Yeah, so my one of my projects to do this weekend, I think I'm going to look for a better quality pair of mittens for my wife, who's tired of her fingers going numb here when she's trying to walk the dog or help scoop snow. We're definitely still transitioning back to Minnesota after being in Oregon for about 20 years, personally and professionally. I am going to go maybe non-traditional today, and I'm not planning on sharing a PowerPoint or any slides. I I'm just going to chat with you. I would like this to be a little bit more of a discussion than a speech. Appreciate anybody that's willing to have their face on camera so I can see who I'm talking with. And Ryan's agreed to kind of chime in if I'm off track, or if you've got some questions, please speak up. I'm just going to try to give you a little perspective from here at Bailey and from what I can speak to from the greater industry, focusing on trees because that's your interest. Just about some trends in the industry. Outside, I'd say more driving business, and I'll talk a little bit about trees and inventory and future as well. So with that, I will start by spending some time just talking about recent, I'll just call it influential trends and changes that is, they're relevant to us, and they're really relevant to everybody. We're in the midst of this pandemic. We're in the midst of this time where it seems like the world is turned upside down a lot of days. All that said, personally, I think the greatest change and the greatest impacting event I've seen in my time here and in my career was the Great Recession that happened just over a decade ago. Our demand really cratered. We had large surpluses. Nurseries were losing a lot of money. Digging trees is hard work, and I'll never forget some of the visuals of harvesting trailer loads of trees, and we weren't even bringing them into the barn. In some cases, they were going straight to the burn pile, and just the look on employees' faces seeing that happen, it is just one of those things that really sears some memory into your brain and impacts decisions you make, I think, for the rest of your career. And I think, in my opinion, rightfully so. Overall production from that time, I would say conservatively, inventories dropped 40%, probably stronger than that, have not recovered from that time still today. Keep in mind that, this is a very cyclical industry, always has been. When you're talking trees, our crops take an average of, generally speaking, a year in the propagation stage and then 2 to 3 years in the field. In our case, there are varieties where we'd put an extra year into the prop stage and or an extra year in the field stage. If we would put some of those products into a container, you would add another 1 to 3 years onto that. So you've got that long-term crystal ball situation. The crystal ball is usually pretty cloudy. And the fact that our industry is, in essence, production is 100% speculative. So all that sort of comes together to just bring some degree of risk aversion. And I guess in our case, it demands a somewhat conservative approach overall. So during that time of the recession, there were some long-standing nurseries that exited the industry. Since then, the decade since, there have been a few acquisitions. We would be part of that group, having acquired Carlton Plants just over a few years ago. So, and the tree business is not one that people are going to easily jump in and out of or want to, if they're sane. And so it's a pretty well established industry, and all that said, that's changed the landscape some naturally. Another factor, I'm saying recent, some of this is ongoing forever, but it sure seems to me that it's been more intense lately, is just the issue of invasive pests and diseases and just invasive plants. Issues you're surely well aware of. Emerald ash borer is top of mind, I'm sure, for this group. Japanese beetle has really impacted our industry and our company. We've got sudden oak death that we're keeping an eye on, spotted lanternfly, something as old and established as fire blight impacting sales, and this newer, much more prevalent issue of species and varieties being deemed invasive and being regulated. So all of those things obviously they can impact sales demand. They can also just create new challenges that might be as simple as regulation and paperwork and red tape to our ability to grow or ship certain plants, requirements to use chemical applications, maybe growing smaller lots due to demand. I don't know, maybe it's Murphy's Law. Just it tends to seem that the varieties that get hit hardest with these things are some of the more popular and or easier to grow varieties. But it talking about that demand, or excuse me, not demand, but just that production in Oregon specifically before the recession, the amount of production it always just sort of awed me. It still does today at decreased levels. Before some of these invasiveness issues, the amount of acres out there that you would see just in ash and Norway maple trees, it was pretty phenomenal. And a lot of that's gone away. Obviously, some has gone into other varieties. Some has just dried up. I will mention the pandemic. Obviously, it's something we are all living with and facing every day, touching everybody's life. But from the start, just from learning what is this and what are the rules and how do they change and how do we play by them, to learning sanitation and how to keep crews separated and how to create barriers, and learning all this on the fly. Spring of 2020, loading some trucks with a question of are they going to be able to be received in their final destination, as every state was sort of doing its own thing. A lot of the issues with the pandemic are the same issues you've all lived with as well. I will say, I would not wish this on anyone or wish us to go through this ever again. The worst and most tragic parts of this is we've lost an employee to the virus. I know of some former employees that are no longer with us because of this. So obviously terrible. From an industry standpoint, the horticulture industry really has benefited during this time. And, thankfully we had a market for our products, we had demand for our inventory, and we had some inventory to sell. Our sales folks would probably be quick to say they wish we had a lot more of that inventory, but all in all, we've been very blessed. The stay at home, the work from home movement has been good for our industry, and I would say we don't expect current demand from that to last forever, but hopefully we have gained some long-term horticulturists and home gardeners. Remains to be seen. Related, I'll just touch on inputs. Again, something we're all surrounded by every day, but we're talking supply chain every day. Those issues are very real for our industry, just like anybody else's. I think that's all well understood, so I won't dwell on that. But I will say, in terms of inventories, some of these things may impact what people can do. Containers and greenhouse trays, for example, we've had months ago already had our suppliers telling us, give us your 2023 order now so we can start planning. So, it's possible that some tree growers that pot in containers may be limited to what they can do this year just because of inventory of pots. So as we go, whether you're talking about containers, talking about building a greenhouse, whatever it may be, always that question of, can we get our supplies, and when can we get them? And if we can, who knows what they're going to cost. So we all hear about inflation every day. No question that overall cost of goods are going up in our industry, just like any others. I would say a big change, and I'll speak more from our standpoint than speaking for the rest of the industry. But I think just from lessons learned from the recession, there's a lot more awareness and a lot more focus on just knowing our numbers. And I don't just mean production metrics, but also really understanding our finances and our financial winners and losers. And I believe that there's just a lot more awareness and focus on that in our entire industry, just based on conversations I've had. This is certainly the case here. We've put a lot of time and energy and efforts into really understanding our costs down to a per item and per customer level. I will say that this has, in a lot of cases, just sort of validated some gut feel, and in other cases, it's been enlightening. But all in all, I would say this isn't a thing that's necessarily changing what we do, but it's just been a really powerful tool in our decision making and looking at our business. And really, it just what that means, it just enables a lot more data-driven decision making versus emotional, which is very important in our business, where we've got a lot of plant lovers, and it's why most people get in this business and enjoy what we do. And that's a wonderful part about our industry. But we also just have to remember that it is a business. And I tell you, there's been more than one time when I've toured a nursery or somebody's toured ours and talking with another nursery professional, and somebody will kind of smile and say, we're all, you're looking at a particular plant or program, and someone will smile and say, we're all guilty of growing some things that we really shouldn't be. And I would say, just broad brush, that's really true. And broad brush, I think that is really changing, and we're all getting a little wiser, realizing we can't be great at everything. We've all got our niches, and there's just less room for that in our industry today. So cost analysis has been a big focus, and again, I think that's prevalent to one degree or another throughout a lot of our industry. Freight, back to sort of the pandemic supply chain type of conversation. Freight has been a major issue influence in our industry right now. A lot of this industry's product travels cross country. Both availability and rates of freight have been a real concern and continue to be moving forward. We, speaking for us here, we have done all we can to try to become more freight friendly. Unfortunately, trees especially, they're a hard thing to containerize and palletize. So loading and unloading is very slow. You're muddying up the inside of a trailer. It's not been uncommon, unfortunately, in the last year for a truck driver to pull up to a dock and realize what they're in for and pull away without taking the load. It's not uncommon for us to have 15 or more drops on a load. That's covering a pretty good distance. So that's just forced us to really look at how can we make this as efficient as possible? How can we be as freight friendly as possible? We're again looking to containerize, palletize where we're able. Trees obviously a challenge on the large side, and we've been forced to look at what are our minimum orders to try to get those orders up to size and make the freight a little more efficient. Freight is a major concern going into the new year and beyond. And I will say the biggest issue, the biggest influencer here lately is without a doubt labor. Probably not a shock. I've said many times that labor and water are the two biggest industries facing our industry. They always have been, always will be. And I think depending on the year, you can kind of flip-flop those in position 1 or 2, depending. Water is top of mind for us as well, and it's definitely an area where we're investing a lot. But labor is sort of everything right now. It's the biggest headwind facing our industry. Silver lining, I will say, we are in an up cycle right now in our industry. It's been pretty good to our industry as a whole. Our industry has also been pretty good at getting a little too excited and overplanting and overproducing when times are good, and pushing ourselves right into the next down cycle. And labor has definitely kept a lid on that. It has been, without a doubt, the top thing that has kept a lid on growth. And I would say that with confidence across the country. You've got people really increasingly relying on government guest worker programs, H-2A and H-2B. We are part of that camp, definitely. And the foreseeable future, we just expect this to continue to be a top issue, labor availability, and it's just really forced us to evaluate everything and question everything and focus our labor, focus our limited resources. So that handful of things, they all just inherently lead to analyzing what we're doing, analyzing our product mix, and asking ourselves a lot of questions. We're asking ourselves, can we grow a variety consistently and at a high enough yield for it to carry its weight. In production, consistency is really everything, and we've got to be able to produce and sell consistently. This includes growing enough of the right size that customers are looking for. And I would just say, generally speaking, again, there's just not the tolerance for failure we used to have. Even at the propagation stage, I mean, I can think of some varieties where we used to just know that you're going to probably get a 50% stand and you just go stick some more cuttings and hope for the best. And here, and again, I'd be pretty comfortable speaking for some of my peers. That's just not the case anymore as it used to be. There's just a lot less tolerance for that and a lot less ability to pull that off. We'll ask ourselves if we can sell enough of a variety to justify it. We'll ask ourselves, will a variety's price reflect the inputs so that both we and a customer can make a profit? And I guess what I mean by that, a couple examples of, as new varieties, new cultivars come out, and you have some niche sales. For example, we're a northern nursery. We will focus on some northern varieties, some cold hardy varieties. That's good, and that makes sense for us. But that can also mean, we've got some particular trees in mind that from seed germination, yield is lower, growth is slower. They're just genetically designed to be able to grow and withstand a northern winter, but that tends to mean slower, smaller growth, smaller sizes, less prime sizes. And so we've just got to ask ourselves, is there a market for this? Can this pencil out for everybody throughout the process? Similarly, there's some more dwarf varieties that, great selections, great trees for good reason. But if you've got two trees from the same genus and one is giving you a 6 foot or 1 inch grade predominantly out of a field, and this more compact one is giving you 4 and 5 foot size grades out of the same field with the same inputs, we just got to make sure that all makes sense, and we've got awareness of that, and that again, that it'll command the right price to carry itself. We'll look at how many customers are buying a variety, those type of questions that probably obvious. So all these things, come together when assessing one's nursery, and they just inherently drive some business decisions. We're very much a fragmented industry. We're a pretty speculative industry, and trees are long-term crops, but really across the country, they're common issues, they're common challenges, they're not secrets. And so I think you could draw some pretty common threads across companies in how these things are impacting us and decisions folks are making based on those issues. So with that list covered, let me just pause for a minute and see if there's any questions on that background, and then I'll get into speaking a little more specific about what's happening here at Bailey's.
Shane, a question did come in. You mentioned looking at cost per customer. What metrics are you using to come to an overall score?
Well, it's not necessarily a score, but I mean, we've gone pretty detailed, and it's our program we've built, if you want to call it that. I mean, it's taken us literally years to develop, and it's sort of evolved each year. So it's I don't know how to simply answer that other than, we're pulling from a lot of reporting, a lot of data, again, to give ourselves the ability to drill down per an item, per a size of an item, autumn blaze maple, how does this look for us overall as a bare root plant, as a container plant, as a XYZ, fill in the blank, but also go down into the per size level and per customer level. And it just starts to get into the finances pretty quick, less about the plants, more about the finances, more about pricing, discounting structures, those kind of things.
Another question here. what is a plant that Bailey's grows that is something you shouldn't?
So this isn't necessarily a good tree example, but I'll tell you, I want to get this chat off here without closing my whole window. A good example for us, we've talked about our some of our evergreen programs a lot, and so dwarf Alberta spruce, again, I'm not talking trees, but is something where it's sort of a commodity item in our industry. It's more of a specialty item for us, just in the in what I would say we're best at and what we focus on. It's a long-term plant. We've grown a 7-gallon plant that's maybe lived in our nursery 7 years. Add some propagation to time to that, and like I say, it's a commodity, so it's not something that people are willing to pay a lot for. In reality, I would argue it's just been something that's been kind of silly for us to grow. Our numbers are minuscule compared to some of the large Oregon evergreen growers that are mass producing this stuff. But that's a good example of, like I say, we all can't be the best at everything. And can we grow a nice dwarf Alberta spruce? Heck yeah. Is it what we're known for? Is it our specialty? Is what we're best at? Is it what I would really hitch our wagon to as a company? No, and I don't think that's what we're known for, nor try to be. We've really grown it more as a service to people to offer with other plants, and it's a good example of a kind of thing you got to step back and look at and say, yes, we're providing a service, but is there enough value in this for both parties?
Great. I had a question around the minimum order, and do the levels of what you need to set your minimum order at, does that change year to year? Is it changing into the future, or is that a pretty constant rate?
So just speaking for us, it has not been constant. I'd say it depends on the year if that's changed or not. That is changing now. There's been years we haven't changed it. There's been years we've made some tweaks and left some alone. There's years we've left that alone, and your pricing increases, so your true minimum is actually less plants per minimum order. It is something we're looking at a lot harder right now. Definitely.
And not to put you on a counting spot, but off the top of your head, do you know what that minimum order is right now?
So it depends. We're in multiple.
Can I jump in, Shane?
Yeah, you go ahead, Brenda.
Here in the Twin Cities, the minimum per year is 2,500. Next year, it's going to 7,500. And, part of the answer to your question is, we're using minimums to help us manage our labor, which is in such short supply. And that's what's driving a lot of it, the shipping cost and the labor issues. So, but different parts of the country have different minimums if you're not within the Twin Cities here.
So we're shipping from multiple points. So, if we're shipping from Oregon versus shipping from Minnesota, it depends where on the map you're at. So it's not as simple as a one minimum for one product line for the whole country. Okay, well, I will carry on, and well, I'll answer this question that I just see coming up about increased demand in trees and shrubs that produce fruit. Did I get that right? So yeah, fruits, just like everything, but probably more so than a lot of our product lines, fruits are very cyclical. Historically, they've been very strong for a while now. We do grow quite a few fruit trees, some small fruits as well. And short answer is yes, that's been really strong, especially through this last few years. So I'll talk a little bit about just some recent changes in our production. A lot of what I would say any evolution in our production cycles lately has been in the propagation area, where our cycles all start. So I will say that more of our trees are starting their life in tissue culture that might be coming out of our own lab or a vendor's lab. There's a lot of both. This would be for several reasons. Some may just be for yield, for consistency, for spreading our workload. I'll give you an example of that. We're going to have some own-root maples, rubrums freemani starting to hit our greenhouses in the next month from the lab, and we'll do that over the course of the next couple months. Historically, when we were taking softwood cuttings from the field, we were compressing all that into about a 2-week window in the month of June when everything else is at its peak. So we're seeing better quality with that, and it's also allowing us to spread our workload a bit. It may be a last resort for propagation. There are some things that we just can't root, for example, and we're putting in the lab. It's not a magic box. In some cases, it's very helpful, but it's not always the answer. And it may take the place of budding. Budding is a job that we do in the summer, grafting out in the field. It's hard work. It's a skill job. It's specialized. We've got a couple varieties we put into culture and reduce our need to bud in the summer. Propagation, I would also say we're growing more and more seedlings in trays or pots of some kind or another. This might be due to special germination needs for a variety. It might be for root growth. For example, if something tends to J-root at a high percent or wants to tap root, we might be growing that in air-prune pots and greenhouse media. Growing in plastic might be because of just sensitive growing needs or winterizing needs. Similar to the tissue culture, just anytime you're putting something in the greenhouse environment, you're obviously investing more in that, but it gives you a lot more year-round control. Now, all that said, we're still traditionally growing out in the seed beds, literally millions of seedlings, and that's not going away anytime fast. But I will say that that trend towards growing in plastic of one kind or another does continue. Another thing in propagation that's changed is we're doing more and more grafting in our greenhouses, and that tends to be on some more specialty varieties. We've explored that where we can, again, just to take some pressure off of that budding job. We can do that at a time of year when the nursery's a little slower. We can do that under cover out of the elements, and it allows us to essentially take a 100% stand out to the field. Next steps from the greenhouse into the fields, with all of my belly aching about the challenges facing the industry, I will say that we've had a handful of tree programs that we have intentionally scheduled ourselves for a longer term crop out in the field, shifting maybe from a 3-year field, for example, to a 4-year field. That's really been just driven by demands for consistent sizes. Again, less tolerance internally for some of those fringe or off sizes that are not desired. That's giving us some more consistency in hitting a high percentage of our crops in the sizes that our customer wants, and getting some larger calipers. That can be to help us spend more time building a strong undercut root system. And in all, when we're committing to a longer term crop, I would say that will leave us maybe a little more cautious in our forecasting, but also more confident in our crops and the yields and the values coming out of those crops. I'll just touch briefly other changes in the fields. We've had heavy progression over several years now towards more and more drip irrigation for water conservation and for growth. We've had continued focus on a strong cover crop program just to work on our soils and our roots in the years that we don't have trees in the ground, and planting the nurseries, much of the nurseries at different times of year. Not so much here in the Midwest, but especially in Oregon, where we've got half of our company essentially on the West Coast, and a good strong percentage of our tree production is out there. And we're now planting about half of our crops out there in the fall versus the spring. Some of that's just cultural preferences for the plants. Some of that, again, is spreading our workload. So that's some of the production evolutions of late. Why don't I pause again, Ryan, and take a couple of questions I see coming through.
Sure, there's one that came in about seed provenance, and if you're seeing enough of an interest, I guess, in the consumer base about the provenance of the seeds, and if that's affecting what you grow, or if that's affecting your propagation of especially native plants.
I would say for us, most specifically in the north, we'll have varieties that we will only use northern source seed and seedlings, or some selections are specifically northern selected and targeted for the north. That's the real big one by far. There are other cases where if we're not collecting seed ourselves, and sometimes even if we are, we'll make a point to get diverse seed source. So it's not all coming from one place. So I would say that depends. But especially some of the varieties that we're growing specifically for the north, we will focus on northern source.
I suppose you might see some variation when you are growing from seed sources. I suppose it depends on species, but when you compare a micropropagation tissue culture method where you're propagating probably very clonally versus you're growing thousands of seeds, you probably in the field, I could imagine there's a lot of variation, and while that could probably lead to interesting plant selection opportunities from a production standpoint, I imagine that the clonal propagation makes kind of your world a little bit more predictable.
Yeah, it does. I mean, there's good and bad to both, right? So varieties that were grown from seed, especially when you've got large quantities out there, I mean, that is sort of your playground for trying to find something new as well, something superior. You just inherently weed out the bad as you go through your grading process to make sure you're giving yourself the right liner for the right program. And yeah, I mean, sometimes if you've got the same species and you've got 5 different sources for your seed, you can see some dramatic differences. Yeah, and it just depends. Sometimes as you grade through those seedlings to take to your field, you'll still see those differences out in the field. But if you're taking similar sizes, similar strength of plant, you won't see quite as wild a variation in the field. But you're right, from an efficiency standpoint, from production, especially when you're talking about cultivars and anything we're doing clonally, it's really cultivars. It's not species. You are getting and you're looking for that more cookie cutter production in terms of size and the characteristics. So both have their place for sure. I wouldn't want to be 100% into one or the other. They just both have their place. But an oak would be an example of where we grow a lot of oak from seed, and we always have, and we want to. But then it's just how do you make that process as good as possible, as effective and efficient as possible for yourself and for your customer. So we used to sow acorns out on the ground and grow oak seedlings by the bajillion, and day one, you'd throw half of them away because they came out looking like a hockey stick, and you weren't real happy with the ones you kept, and depending on what you had, you would just be as selective as you were allowed to. Where now those are an example where we took that whole program out of the field. We're growing them all in air prune pots now. We're doing some pinching, you're doing some transplanting and some extra handling, but your yield is just dramatically improved. Your root system going to the field it looks like a different plant. They're so much better than what we used to work with. And obviously your end yield, your end size distribution is better, and you've got a better product to put out there for the next person and eventually in the landscape. So I probably rambled enough about that.
Nice. Another question had come in. Needle cast diseases are affecting most spruce at 15 to 20 years old. Do you have any sense of, are there tolerant varieties, possibly Meyer or Norway or others?
I'm going to guess there's probably somebody else on the call that knows the answer to that better than I do. I know it's a major issue. I don't know that there are any great solutions out there today.
I'm not sure either. But that's the current set of questions. So
okay. I'll just talk a little bit about just what we've got sort of in the fields and in the warehouses this winter. Just a snapshot of some genus. Remember, I said we'd be harvesting a little over 1 million bare trees this winter. We'll surely be planting a decent chunk of those in our own containers, and a bigger percentage of that is just being sold bare root. Of all that we're growing, Acer is by far the biggest genus for us in trees. There's a lot within that. The main groups that make up that maple genus are in order. Freemanize is the largest, then rubrums, sugars, and Norways. And then you've got a whole lot of varieties that were grown in much smaller quantities: Tatarians, Griziums, Negundos, Truncatums, silver maples, many others. But it's just a very important genus for our nursery and for our industry. The next one, as far as size that we're producing, surely is ornamental malus. And I will say that just looking at our inventory right now, we've got really strong sales for grabs overall, but that is a group that as a whole we've been scaling back a little bit over the last few years. I'll say, just kind of a side note, ornamental apples and fruit apples, which we grow a lot of, those would be a good example too of where as we're evaluating what we're doing, we've looked for a lot of opportunity to say we're growing a variety in both a 2-year and a 3-year field. Can we consolidate those into one? Or if we're growing them on 2 different root stocks, can we pick the most desired one and roll them into one program to help give ourselves some efficiencies and at the same time keep a variety viable to be able to continue to sell that for customers. Some trends, I guess, some strong trends in trees right now, and just thinking about the last few years, I would say Aesculus, ginkgo cultivars have been strong for us. They're specialty programs. They're not the easiest to grow. Not everybody does them. They're a 4-year crop. So not everybody's going to jump in and out of those, but those have seen pretty strong demand. Small trees like amelanchers, cercis, cornus, magnolias have seen strong demand. Gymnocladus has been an interesting genus. We've grown straight species coffee tree for many years, and I think we're probably slightly pulling back on that as we introduce more of the new cultivars that have come on, and there seems to be some good demand for those. It's a little tricky to grow. It took us a little time to figure that out, but I think we've got that nut cracked and went through our learning curve, and that's one that is steadily ramping up. The oak group is a big genus for us, and while we still grow a whole lot of straight species oaks, white oak, swamp white oak, northern red, burrs, I will say that in general, the species have softened and strong demand in the cultivars, and we've kind of followed with that trend and added a couple cultivars and slowly increasing some numbers in those. And then I would say what I would call native naturalizing type trees like Cladrastus, Austria, Carpinus. Those have been genus that have been pretty strong. Some species, a little bit of cultivar, but more species. And we're growing some of those in smaller numbers, but they've seen pretty strong demand. Some notables that I would say have softened for us in the industry. Birch tends to have seemed to soften a little bit as a whole. Some varieties are strong, but that's lightened a bit. We've got some cultivars too that we've tried and failed at that are tough to get through storage. Ornamental pear is one. I'll tell you, we're going to sell quite a few ornamental pear yet this spring, but that's one that's really crashing hard and fast, and we're looking to be proactive and get ahead of scaling our numbers way back on pear to the point of probably not even growing some ornamental pears. Platanus, the plane tree group has softened. Sorbus is not a big category for us anymore, but that's seen steady decline for quite a few years now. As I understand, just most of that is driven by fire blight. So overall, again, tree sales are are in a really strong spot right now. Even within, just certain genus and species will cycle and go up and down. Species within a genus will cycle up and down. But I would say large other groups like poplar, honey locust, tree lilacs, elms, hackberry, lindens, those have been fairly steady. Again, within that, we might grow 15 varieties of an elm or linden, and you'll see some that are strong and some that are soft. But I'd say as a whole, fairly steady. And some of that, it's easy to look at our demand relative to what we've got in the field, but some of that again just comes back to crystal ball. An example that would be Zelkovas. A few years ago, we would have given anything to have hundreds or thousands of more Zelkovas to sell. And last year's crop, we had a beautiful crop, and we were long on them. And that was probably just nothing more than our poor forecasting, looking at that cloudy crystal ball. So those are sort of some of the main groups. We grow a lot beyond that, from alders to catalpas to Cercidophyllum. Hawthorn, I would say, is a smaller group now. We still grow a couple of ash trees, believe it or not. Very few. Metasequoias, larch, willows, taxodium. All of these other groups, they bring a lot of diversity to the nursery and to what we offer, but generally speaking, those start to get to where we're growing a lot smaller quantities. So I guess I would say on the subject of diversity, it's something that gets debated plenty just here internally, is what does that mean and what is too diverse and not diverse enough? And you could ask 10 different people at Bailey's and get 10 different answers. Within a genus or a species, are 12 varieties too many? Are they not enough? It depends on who you ask, but I will say, just as we're evaluating what we're doing today, we do continually evaluate adding new things as well. We'll ask ourselves, really a lot of those same questions, just in terms of the market and our ability to grow. That almost always means you need to do some trialing to figure out how to grow the thing and see what kind of a market there is for it. But I would just say that, we've got a vested interest in diversity. It's obviously good for our landscapes, and it's good for our businesses as well to be diversified. So it's something we'll always revisit, and also just have to look at within financial realities and operational limitations as well. So I will just try to summarize and leave a little time for some chat. But as far as what that all means for future inventories, just speaking for ourselves, I would say our approach is, regardless of the cycle we're in, we generally don't take wild swings with trees, up or down. It's obviously easiest to scale up in your small baby plants, and most difficult in your caliper trees, especially when you get out to a container, or if you're growing in the ground B&B. And some of those inventories are lean right now and going to take some time to catch up. Fully expect labor to remain very tight, and labor availability and labor costs to influence every nursery in this country as far as decisions on growing more or not. As far as the economy the next 2 to 4 years, heck, you tell me. Who knows? But again, I would just say bottom line is we don't expect current demand to last forever. It never does. That said, unless something really dramatic happens economically, I would not anticipate seeing great increases in inventory availabilities here in the near future. I would also point out, from recession on and everything that our industry's been through, I think the suppliers that are growing trees and selling trees today, it should be a pretty strong and stable bunch. It's been a good couple of years for tree nurseries, and so I think that group should be ready for the next down cycle and here to stay. So I'll turn it back over to you, Ryan, for any questions.
Great. Yeah, you've definitely struck a nerve here on this last section. I guess jumping off of the diversity first, Paul Buck is wondering, so as a city, they preach diversity, but it sounds like in their city, maple and crab are still number 1 and number 2, and similar across many municipalities. So his question is, how do we as a community support you growing more diversity?
Yeah, it's a hard thing because I mean, I just had a conversation with one of my in-laws not long ago, and horticulture it's just not a well-known industry, and I was talking to an in-law not long ago that asked about planting a blaze maple in his front yard, and probably doesn't even know what a blaze maple means other than it's a name he's heard and maybe what the neighbor has. And I mean, I remember many years ago hosting a grower group at our nursery, and this was a topic that came up, is the issue of diversity and how do you help make that better just out in our landscapes across the country. While people are saying, yes, this is the right thing to do, yet here's my order for a bunch of red maples and pear trees. And it's a different but similar topic. I think we're in a great position right now with just all of the benefits, just the health and environmental and well-being benefits of trees, and what we can do and the story we have to tell. But it is a real challenge getting that message out and getting it out collectively. And I wish I had better answers for you. I mean, the reality is, if we're growing back to that emotional versus data-driven decision making, we can have a tree that we all just love and adore, but if we go 5 years growing it and we can only sell 50 of them, it just doesn't hold, and that demand does drive some of what we do.
Yeah, it's certainly a cyclical industry, and I'm sure there's going to be a feedback loop as we keep going and the awareness grows with Emerald Ash Borer, and eventually we'll start seeing that diversity awareness come into kind of the public.
I agree, that helps. I think, the autumn blaze maple example, it still just amazes me, the staying power of that tree and how many we grow a year. It's less than it used to be, but it's just an incredible amount. But, I think some of that, back to those examples of like an ironwood or a carpinus, where are we growing and selling the same amount as we are an autumn blaze maple? No, but those are varieties that when I was first learning to grow trees, we really struggled with for some years, and we were really inconsistent with them. We've really got consistency figured out. We're seeing those numbers incrementally increase. It's incremental, nothing's fast in this industry, but some of those trends are positive for sure.
Yeah. Are there any specific ornamental varieties or new shade tree varieties that you specifically are excited about? Any pet projects?
Oh, I don't have any pet projects that I'm personally involved in. It's always kind of what's new mean. New in the tree business is so different than even in the flowering shrub business, because it's just so much slower. So I'd have to think about that. I mean, when I think of, just some conversations in the last week, for example, and I said birch as a whole has kind of been soft, and a birch selection that we produce has been really strong, a columnar birch, and I'd say columnar and dwarf is something that we've talked about for many years, and is this real or is this not? And I think that's a real trend right now, and we're seeing that, but that's definitely something that, it doesn't feel new to me because we've been growing it for probably a decade or better, but I'd say it's definitely new to the industry, and something that's been exciting. Yeah, we've got a few there, and I don't know, Brenda, if you've got any. Brenda or Rick, I see her on here, may have something to add to that, but.
Another question here from Stefan. Do you ever try or plan to grow black walnut or bitternut hickory, and using air pruning pots to solve the taproot issues?
My personal opinion is no. We've gone down the Juglins Carria path a couple different times, not very far. We were growing one walnut here that we just got out of. a lot working against us trying to take something like that on, including some regulation. We did not have the appetite for that. And my personal view is I see that as something that is more of a specialty crop, probably something that is more of a nursery's specialty. You ask about pet projects, I think that would be one. I don't see us have an appetite for that.
Yeah.
And I get it, it's back to that diversity conversation. I understand it, and I understand the desire for them and some need and demand out there. They really don't fit with what we're doing.
Yeah, well, it also opens up opportunities for other smaller growers, more, niche growers who maybe want to focus on very local varieties, or these more difficult to grow species at scale. Let's see, lots of questions. Thanks, everyone. From the nursery production standpoint, are there any, with all the new technology coming out and things like AI, I don't know, are there any new automation efficiency type things that you think about in terms of nursery production? Or is it, do you see kind of the way you're working in the fields now, the way you're going to be working in the field in 30 years?
Oh, I hope not. I mean, that's what's fun about this business is you do something for 10 years and then you get to the point where you change it and look back and say, why in the heck were we doing that? That makes it fun. I would say the biggest things we're looking at today are focused on the greenhouse and the container side of tree growing more than bare root. I'd say our bare root side of growing, really our opportunities we've seen ahead of us has been mostly focused on water and irrigation. And that's where we've had our biggest gains, if you want to say automation wise or efficiency wise. We personally have not done much of anything with drones yet. We've played with them a little bit. I'm pretty excited about some of the technology now with spraying with drones. I think that's got huge potential for us. We've looked at RFID. We hadn't been able to make that pencil out yet for us, but I'm still sure we're going to pursue that, and that will become part of our reality. I think it's harder for me to envision the great gains in some of our bare root production steps. Where I see those gains is where we pull some of those things out of the soil and put them again into my greenhouse example. You're putting more money into that plant for sure, but you do give yourself a little more opportunity to protect, give yourself a little more control and a little more opportunity to automate. So right now it's from the flat filling, the soil mixing and potting side of things, mulches and mechanically applicating mulches to reduce herbicide needs, heavy in irrigation technology, those kind of things.
Nice. And could you just define what RFID is?
So that's what's RFID stand for, radio frequency. So it's basically reading barcodes and the goal would be from, if you're talking about a container from the day you plant that thing and put it out on the ground till the day it leaves, you can track and use that to inventory. Where we really want to make that work was in our bare root, from harvest on through storage and shipping, to make that all more automated and computer driven and less manual, and just get rid of some paperwork as well as accuracy. When you're dealing with thousands of trees in a day and you're manually touching and counting those things, you're never perfect. And so getting that perfect.
Yeah, great.
It's in the industry, it's newer. Like you say, it hasn't worked out for us yet, but we'll get there.
Nice. Well, everyone, we're coming right up on 11 here, and I want to respect Shane's time. Lots of questions here, but
so Ryan, why don't I, since I didn't put anything on the screen, why don't I make sure, well, you do have my contact. That's probably easier than trying to have everybody remember how to spell my name. And if you could funnel questions my way, I'd be more than happy to follow up with anything that's come up that that I haven't answered.
Great, great. Thank you. And everyone, I did just post a link to a Google form. So if you could fill that out, if you're looking for an ISA CEU, this session did qualify for one CEU. With that, thank you, Shane, so much. Thanks to Brenda for connecting the dots and getting us all together here as well. And really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for coming, and have a great rest of your week and morning.
Take care. Thanks.